USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veteran stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
Yeah, name is Karl Gustavson. Grew up in a small town in Colorado called Grand Junction. It's on the western side of Colorado. Lived there until 1998, and then I did 2 years missionary service in Brazil from 98 to 2000. Came home from that and was in college in 2001. 9/11 happened, dropped out of college and decided to join the military. I had a cousin who was a Marine during Desert Storm. He's about 8 years older than me. And I remember when he came home from Desert Storm, sitting down and talking to him, and I was only 11 or 12 years old when Desert Storm happened, you know. So talking to him, and after he came home from that conflict and feeling like this was the coolest guy that I knew, you know, here was an American hero, he was my cousin, it really brought it home. So when 9/11 happened, you know, one of the first people I talked to in the aftermath was my cousin. I said, hey, I feel like I need to sign up and serve. And his recommendation was to look into Special Forces, with Army, Navy, just because as far as the training and the camaraderie and the type of missions that you get to do, they're a cut above, right? So when I joined, with the first time that I went and talked to the recruiter, he sat me down and said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be a Navy SEAL. This is, you know, what I want to do. And I had a couple friends, a guy that I went to high school with who had joined the SEALs right out of high school, and some other people I knew that had gone through the training. And so he said, oh, you know, all right, let's talk a little bit about that. And I think he was trying to sell me on the idea. He felt like as a recruiter, he had to do the pitch, you know. And I stopped him in the middle and I said, look, you don't have to sell me the idea. I want to do this. I was like, you just have to show me where to sign on the dotted line and what this all entails. And so he brought out, at the time, it was called a SEAL Challenge contract. Then you sign the contract, and it basically means if you pass the PFT, the physical fitness test, and you score above a certain percentile on the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, you had to score, I think, above like the 60th percentile or something. And if you could pass those two tests, then you would get an opportunity to go to BUD/S. You would get a spot at BUD/S. So pretty much immediately after, this was probably, I sat down with the recruiter probably 2 weeks after September 11th. And so we talked about, you know, the delayed entry program and going to MEPS and what the whole thing. And so I was sort of officially in the Navy by December. Had signed on the dotted line. They gave me an ID card as temporary, you know, this is who you are. And then April of 2002 was boot camp. So I will tell you, I had no idea about, you know, I knew that it was hard, right? It has even back then it had the mystique of being the hardest military training in the world. And I had talked to a couple other people about, you know, it's an 80% attrition. And I thought, you know, okay, I've never quit anything. So, and I was working actually at the time, I was studying kinesiology. I wanted to go into coaching and sports medicine. So I was in good shape. I kind of knew how to prepare myself. And, but the information, the proliferation of information about the SEAL teams and what they were wasn't then in 2001 what it is today. But yeah, day one of training kind of hit me like a truck because I wasn't 100% necessarily prepared for what BUD/S was going to be. I think now, 25 years later, kids that are going through SEAL training are much more prepared from the standpoint of they kind of know. There's been documentaries, there's been, you know, so many books and movies and YouTube, and there's people that, you know, that I went through training with years and years ago who now run like BUD/S prep programs to get these kids specifically ready for the test that they're, and for me, there was none of that. You know, I did pull-ups and I ran, but mostly I was just designing my own fitness program. You know, and not to date myself, but the internet was still fairly new in 2000, 2001. So you couldn't just go online and Google Navy SEALs and get all this information. So, you know, but what I like to tell people is you can only be physically ready to a certain point. And then it's where the rubber meets the road, right? And so even today, even with all the proliferation of information and the physical readiness, people show up on day one and quit because it's still really hard.
Did you ever feel like you weren't going to cut the mustard?
Yeah, I think there was one day in particular, we had a really tough night. I think it was probably Tuesday night of Hell Week. And we had gone, it was like evening time, so it was just going into nighttime, and we were sitting down for chow. For the first like 3 days, I think 2 or 3 days of Hell Week, you don't eat hot meals. You eat cold MREs on the beach. And so you don't get to go to the chow hall and eat hot meals all of Sunday night, all of Monday, all Monday night, all of Tuesday night, and then your first breakfast on Wednesday is your first like chow hall. You get to go eat a hot meal. But we were eating this cold MRE. We were in these concrete bunkers that are way down the beach, away from the command, and it started hailing. So sun is going down. You know you're getting ready for a long, cold night. Our Hell Week was in April, and so it was cold outside. We're wet. We're sitting. The guys are already miserable. You can see that the long look on people's faces where they're sort of steeling themselves for the night. And it starts hailing, and you can hear it outside. You can hear the hail pounding on the rubber boats that we'd carried all the way down there. And guys started getting up and lining up to quit. You know, they take the bell, that's ubiquitous during Hell Week. They take it everywhere. So if you want to quit, you just ring out 3 times. And so guys start getting up and lining up. And I'm watching my friends and the guys that I've gone through the first 4 weeks of training plus 2 weeks of indoc. So it's 6 weeks you've been with these guys, and these are the toughest guys you know. And they're lining up at this point to quit. And I'm looking at these guys that I look up to, or guys that I thought for sure, me and this guy are going to be there on the last day, and they're quitting, and it kind of takes a piece of you. And so there was a moment where I turned to my roommate in Buds, and I was like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this. I was like, I'm having this self-doubt, and I'm already pretty sore and tired, and it's only Tuesday or whatever. And he looked at me and he said, just go till something breaks. That was his advice. Just go till something breaks. I said, yeah, that's it. I was like, I'm not going to quit. Whatever happens, if I'm not going to make it, it's because my body's going to give out on me and there's nothing left, but it's going to be physical. It's not going to be because I quit mentally. And really that was the only day that I look back and I think that was my one moment where I needed somebody to kind of give me a little push and have some words of encouragement. And my roommate fortunately stepped forward and did that. And then after that, it was like made it from Tuesday into Wednesday. And by the time you make it to Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, you're you're over the hump, right? Yeah, you're there. And Hell Week runs until about Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and then they secure it. So you kind of, once you're on the downward slide and you're like, there's nothing they can do to me that they haven't already done, and so you make it past that point.
That must be a good feeling when you really came out the other side, you're going to get it.
Yeah, there's the tradition at Buds is that when you come out the other side, the class that's already gone before you, that's sort of waiting on the other side, they have their guys prepare these baskets for you. It's just like a milk crate, right? Like a plastic milk crate, and it's got your helmet in it, and it's got some warm clothes, and all the way leading up to Hell Week, you wear a white t-shirt with your name stenciled on it. So you're white shirts until you make it through Hell Week. And then what's sitting in those baskets is a stenciled brown shirt. And so you come through Hell Week gets secured, you come out, you got your warmies, and you got your first brown t-shirt with this like crudely stenciled last name. But I'll tell you what, no autographed NFL jersey, no piece of cloth that you could give me would have meant more to me in the world than that stenciled brown t-shirt on that Friday when you secure Hell Week, because it's like, that's the hardest part of Buds is behind you. And even though there's still 22 weeks of Buds left after Hell Week, it's still like, that's the part that, that's the part that gets everybody is Hell Week. Once you make it through Hell Week, I think there's something like a 75% chance that you're going to make it through Buds. So
you still got the shirts?
I still have the original stenciled brown t-shirt because I was like, I'm going to want to save this. And then you go buy a pack of brown t-shirts and you stencil them because, you run them ragged, they get torn up and you're always wet and stuff. But the one that I got when we secured Hell Week, I set it aside. I said, this is my brown t-shirt, and I still have it in a bag somewhere. Along with like an old original set of Navy dungarees that I got issued in boot camp, So you graduate Buds, you go into an additional 3 months of training called SEAL Qualification Training, or SQT. At the end of SQT, or probably a couple weeks before the end of SQT, you submit what we call a dream sheet, which is just like the teams that you would want to go to. So most of the teams I wanted to go to were on the West Coast. In fact, all 3 of the ones that I chose, because my family's all in Colorado and California. And so I thought, I'll stay out here, I got my girlfriend's out here at the time and whatever. And I got sent to, I picked West Coast teams, I got sent to the East Coast SDV team. So the SEAL Delivery Vehicle team. But 2 things happened. One, my class graduated 25 guys, and half of those guys went to either SDV Team 1 in Hawaii or SDV Team 2 in Virginia. It's just like, you pick your desired teams, and then it's like needs of the Navy, and if what you want meets the needs of the Navy. So they sent me to SDV Team 2 in Virginia, and that's where I did the first 6 years of my career. So we did a ton of diving, a lot of time in Florida, a lot of time crammed in the front of the 25-foot, wet submersible. So, in my mind, it was a little bit, the most disappointing thing about it, I guess, was that I knew that we were in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was what I had come in to do, was fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. And here I am training for this undersea mission that's probably not going to happen in all likelihood, tagging a ship or, blowing up drug boats or something like that, which wasn't really going on at the time. But it's still a capability that the SEAL teams advertise, and so they were still maintaining these two teams. So I got sent to one of those teams. In the long run, it ended up being okay because while I was at SDV Team, I got to strap hang on deployments with some of the DevGroup squadrons. So I got to do actually a couple of combat deployments in Iraq with development group.
What year is this now you get over there?
So I checked into SDV Team 2 in 2003, and then the first deployments that I did as a strap hanger with development group were in 2007 and 2008. So prior to that, we did a deployment for presence to Bahrain, and then we did some other just like small deployments where we were going forward, but not really doing all that much.
What kind of missions are we involved with that kind of work? Is there anything like extractions or anything, or are we just
with like SDV missions?
Yeah.
A lot of what we trained, since we're a very small team, only 6 guys typically could go out in the SDV, so we would train a lot of like reconnaissance and surveillance. So for example, when I checked in, shortly after I checked into the team, SDV Team 1 and SDV Team 2 were the teams that were tasked with going to do the Operation Red Wings. Marcus Luttrell and Danny Dietz and Matt Axelson and those guys, because they were a small, very skilled reconnaissance team. And so they had tasked them to go do this reconnaissance up in the mountains in Afghanistan, which unfortunately went badly, and all those guys ended up getting killed except for Marcus.
So what is the most hairy thing you have first encountered as a SEAL at this point?
So right after I checked into the team, and this wasn't me personally, but right after I checked into the team, a few of the guys that I had gone through training with went overseas, and my good friend Clark Schwadler was killed on his first deployment. His platoon chief, a guy named Mike Day, got shot 27 times, lived through it. I think he got shot with 11 rounds, and then 16 rounds hit his gun or body armor. Another buddy of mine, Chris Judge, got shot. Another buddy of mine, Jimmy Schroeder, took a couple rounds, had some nerve damage and stuff. So, right away, guys that I know are getting injured over there. And then Red Wings happens, and my good friend Danny Dietz was killed. And, so we have this memorial. Obviously, at the time, Operation Red Wings, or the Lone Survivor Operation as it came to be known, was the biggest single loss in naval special warfare history, because you had the guys on the ground got killed, and then the rescue helicopter that came in with the guys from SEAL Team 10 was shot down, and so those guys died as well. And so you had this massive loss of life, and so it really brings that home. And that was 2005. So that was right around the time that I was doing my first combat deployments and stuff. I didn't personally see anything that was like super hairy until I got injured in 2008. We saw combat, but I always felt like we had the upper hand, like we were the overwhelming force. And it wasn't until I went on my deployment to Bakaba in 2008 that we really started. Every target we went on, guys were coming outdoors with suicide vests, or guys were coming outdoors fighting, or as we're making approach to buildings, people are taking pot shots at us in the street. I mean, every night we were engaged. Every time we went out, it was a gunfight. And so that was the first time it was really like heavy sustained combat. And I was out there for a month on that Bakaba deployment, basically for all the way through January. And then in February was the night that I got shot, February 4th.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that and the details of how that happened to you?
We went out on a target. We were looking for a high value target. We had 2 target compounds, a northern target and a southern target. And so we had helicopters out there, helicopter gunships. And so we had done some gun runs on these 2 targets to kind of soften them up. And then we were going to make entry into the targets and see what we could see. Hopefully everybody inside would be taken care of already. On the northern target, They had a vehicle-borne IED, so they had a vehicle in the courtyard of the target that they clacked off when the guys were making approach, so some of the guys got injured up there. On the southern target, a guy had managed to recess himself a couple rooms back, hidden under some furniture behind a barricade or whatever, and he was prone on the ground with a belt-fed machine gun. And so the first two guys coming through the door, Mike Koch and Nate Hardy, were engaged and killed in the doorway. I was standing in a security position, maybe 20 or 30 feet behind them. So I heard the exchange of gunfire, turned around, started moving to where they were to try and either pull them out of the door or engage the guy if I could see him. Couldn't see him because it was dark inside the building and there was some loom outside, so I couldn't see into the building. And as I started making approach, he shot, hit me in the leg. A second round hit my bulletproof vest. A couple rounds snapped past my head and hit the wall behind me. And at that point, I moved to there was a second structure in the courtyard. It was like an animal pen or something. I ducked behind that, went and took cover, put a tourniquet on my leg, and then we managed to get some guys down from the northern target to engage the guy that was in the house. They killed him. We still weren't sure if there was any other, living guys in the house, and so we decided to pull back and just drop the house. So we pulled the guys out of the doorway, medevaced me and them to a hospital in Balad, and then we had the AC-130 gunship overhead. Dropped 105 rounds on the house until there was nothing left of it.
Was the other two guys KIA at that time, or they medevaced out and then they died at the hospital? Or?
When they put us on the medevac, there were only 2 litters. We only had 2 litters with us at the time, so they laid me between the 2 of them. And during the medevac flight, I wasn't sure what their condition was. I couldn't really tell, and it was dark. But I think now, in retrospect, I think they were probably dead before we got on the helicopter. Yeah, they were had probably expired already at that point.
So you knew you were hit, but did you feel like you were going to make it? Was there any? Obviously been.
Yeah, there was never a doubt in my mind that I was going to make it. I got hit and pretty much immediately had to move. So I was on my feet, putting weight on the leg that got hit. I could tell that the bone wasn't broken or anything. So right away that was good. I could feel that, I was bleeding into my boot, so I could tell there was a fair amount of blood, but I know arterially there's not anything really major. I didn't get hit high, which was good. And so I had put a tourniquet over my knee. I could feel that stopped the blood. And so I was fairly cognizant of everything. We used to carry these like fentanyl lollipops on target to in case you get hit or something like that. But I didn't take anything until we had already finished the gunfight, until everything was secured, and then when we moved to the medevac helo was when I finally was like, okay, I'm here, we're getting exfilled, and so did the fentanyl lollipop, and then the rest of the night was,
Well, how long are you in recovery from that injury?
About 9 months. It was so that was February, and then it was about 8 or 9 months of recovery. So I say part of that was, the physical rehabilitation of getting able to use my foot. And I had a orthopedic surgeon that did a sort of an experimental surgery on my foot where they moved a tendon from my big toe to the outside of my foot because some of the nerve damage I had was causing foot drop. So I couldn't really run or walk without kind of rolling my ankle. The superficial peroneal nerve in my right leg was totally severed, which is the nerve that controls your ability to lift the outside of your foot. And so that nerve was gone. And so if it hadn't been for my surgeon performing that surgery, I wouldn't have been able to do the job. Like that would have been it. And they would have done this evaluation, then they would have med boarded me, and the medical board would have said, yep, if you can't walk without rolling your ankle all the time, you certainly can't do combat operations or jumping or any of that kind of stuff. And so it was really Dr. Stewart, Joel Stewart was the name of the orthopedic surgeon. And really, he kind of saved my career, put me back on my feet. And then I had a tremendous group of physical therapists and strength and conditioning trainers at the command who worked with me every step of the way to get me back. This was all in Virginia Beach. So immediately after recovery, once I was back on my feet, I screened for selection and training to come over to development group. And then, so injured in February of 2008, screened for development group in December of 2008. So essentially 10 months later, screened, had to go through their rigorous screening process. And then in 2009, April of 2009, I started that selection process. It's about a 6-month training course. Graduated from what we call Green Team, Selection and Training for Development Group, in November of 2009, and then was chosen to go to one of the squadrons, Silver Squadron, at Development Group. And then the rest of my career there, the next 16 years.
You know, you were honored today. Tell us a little bit about today getting a cane for your Purple Heart, and here at the UDT Navy SEAL Museum, and coming home to that to receive this cane.
Now, for what we are here for. These canes were all carved by our carvers, and we present them with honor. Senior Chief Karl Gustavson, Navy. He's going to come up the other way. Senior Chief Karl Gustavson entered the Navy in 2002. Served with distinction through 2024, a career of 22 years. He served with SDV 2, with SEAL Team 6. He completed training class BUDS 245, and he was wounded in action on the 4th of February 2008 in Bagaruba. Okay, as you say. Iraq. He has been awarded 3 Bronze Stars, 5 Joint Service Commendations, and many more. Now, there is a tie between him and Rick Kaiser. Rick Kaiser was actually one of his instructors coming up. Thank you. Welcome home. Corporal Stern.
Yeah, you know, really moving experience today, the whole ceremony and everything. This actually came about because I was working with a nonprofit called Boot Campaign. Came down and did a speaking event for them here in Vero Beach, and I met Lloyd Lazenby. And at the end of the event, he came up and he kind of heard my story, and he said, "Hey, you know, you're a Purple Heart recipient. We have this Purple Heart cane project, and we would love to do a cane for you." And I said, "Yeah, you know, that sounds great." I don't know, was not even aware of this organization or anything. And so he kind of told me what it was. And I gave him my service details and everything. And then a couple months ago, he contacted me and he said, "Hey, we're going to do the presentation in January, and we'd like you to come down to Vero Beach for the presentation." I said, "Yeah, for sure." But you know, you retire from the military and you kind of expect that sort of the accolades or recognition, all of that is like, comes when you're in service, right? You have your awards boards, or you get your medals, or whatever it is. And then afterwards, it's kind of like a pat on the back and, hey, thanks for your service in the different places you go. But I think it's really nice. It's really touching to be honored for our service. And it's really a cool thing for me to be able to be there with, you know, guys who I think there are guys out there today from Vietnam and Korea, and guys who had served in World War II who had, you know, sons or daughters who were receiving the canes for them. And just to know that, you know, it's like you're in this mixed company of people from all of these different conflicts that our country has been involved in. And just to see all these people generationally who put it all on the line, you know, who put literally blood, sweat, and tears out on the battlefield for the country that we all love. And then to be able to be a part of that, and I think me and one other guy are probably the most recent, right? I think there was one other guy from Fallujah, a Marine from Fallujah, and then there was one Navy corpsman from the modern conflicts. So just to see those people, and even though all of those guys I had never met before, but it's a brotherhood, right? Of everybody who's there getting honored today. And so I think it's a tremendous thing that the Purple Heart Cane Project is doing. So, and really cool to be a part of it. We had a beautiful day. And the fact that it's at the SEAL Museum, which is near and dear to my own heart, because there's so much of my career that's inside of that building, you know. So I took about 6 months off after service. You know, most people recommend that. They say, hey, take some time to yourself. And during that time, I was invited to do a couple of law enforcement trainings with a nonprofit called Community First Project that was founded by a former teammate of mine, Andrew Sullivan. And I've always really enjoyed when I was active duty and now in retirement, training law enforcement. I think our law enforcement personnel don't get nearly the accolades and recognition that they should. I think there's a lot of things like even, the Purple Heart Cane Foundation that's still giving guys pats on the back years and years later. And I think a lot of times our law enforcement men and women do so much for the communities and just kind of goes unheralded. And so after doing a couple of trainings with Community First Project, I was offered the Director of Operations position. So I took that position, and that's what I do now is I help to fundraise and train law enforcement so we can offer Tier 1 level training to our law enforcement professionals at no cost to their department. So that's what we do now. Yep. Yeah, so right at the tail end of my career as I was getting ready, like I said, I retired at the end of May in 2024. A friend of mine, Medal of Honor recipient Ed Byers, reached out to me and he said, hey, I'm putting together this jump team that I want to go jump into the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Would you want to do that? And I said, absolutely. I love jumping. It was a passion of mine when I was in. And so I said, for sure. And then it was a really good group of guys that we had worked with, Lou Massey and Ed Byers and Rob Bathurst and Fred Williams and Bruno Fallon and some of these other guys, Andrew Sullivan, founder of Community First Project. And so it was not only the fact that we got to go jump into Normandy, but it was this group of guys, many of whom had preceded me in retirement or some of whom I'd lost touch with. And we got to go do this experience. And so it was also the launch point for Ed's nonprofit foundation, the Untold Journey Foundation. So it was, a combination of a foundation that I want to get behind, getting to do some really cool jumps with some good friends of mine, and then also getting to be a part of, that history, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And both of my grandfathers fought in World War II. One of them was part of the Army Air Corps. He was a navigator on bombers, and then my other grandfather was in the Navy. He was a shopkeeper on a ship in the Pacific. And so to get to sort of commemorate that event and honor their service and sort of the legacy of that. And then, so I retired on May 31st, and then on June 1st, we flew to Normandy. And between June 2nd and June 12th, we ended up doing, I think, 8 jumps. And so we jumped into Bois de Limours and Lafayette Bridge and the area where the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment jumped in, and Mont Saint-Michel and some of these other places. And we got to jump into these historic drop zones. We got to do a static line jump into Lafayette Bridge with 1,500 other jumpers from all these different branches of service, and there were French jumpers and Belgian jumpers and Brazilian jumpers and German jumpers and everybody out there honoring this great thing. And then to get to be a part of that, and then, it was the 80th anniversary, but there's still 200 D-Day and World War II veterans who came out to the American Cemetery to do the big memorial on June 6th. And to see those men, and the fact that there's still 200 of them alive and they're all 105 years old now was a super impressive thing. But also to get to talk to them and hear their stories. And, the last surviving Tuskegee Airman is one of the guys that was out there. And we got to talk to a guy who enlisted, lied about his age, enlisted when he was 16 or 15 and was coming across Normandy on Omaha Beach on his 16th birthday. And, so it's just one of these things where it's like, that generation and what they did in comparison to, it's not apples and oranges, right? But there's no really comparison between the conflicts. But those guys, I've always looked up to the guys who fought in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, because warfare was a different animal back then. And to get to hear their stories and shake their hands and know that we're all still fighting for the same red, white, and blue, hopefully for the same foundational values that make our country great, and that means something to me. So it was a really awesome thing to get to do.
You got to see the memorial, obviously, on Utah.
And I got to see the memorial, right before we went out there. They dedicated they used to have a Navy Combat Demolition Unit memorial and an Underwater Demolition Team memorial out there, which were the Navy units that were the predecessors to the SEALs. Yeah, just a really neat thing to be able to go down and see that and sort of toast to the men who came before us, the legacy. Yeah. Yep.